You're welcome back to the Gavel. Nearly 2 weeks ago, the Senate amended the 2010 Electoral Act. And one of the key areas in the amendment is that the Senate has approved the use of electronic voting in future elections and that election results should be electronically transmitted in an encrypted and secured manner to collation centers to prevent hacking. Now, we interviewed a member of a Senate committee on INEC, Senator Ovie, Omo-Agege, to examine the amendments made by the Senate.
There are several of them. What we sought out to achieve from the outset was to look at those areas where we had mischiefs and how we could bring amendments, to correct those mischiefs. We began with the issue of Kogi State. You recall what transpired there. An election was conducted. Awudu, the candidate of APC, was more or less running away, to the finish line. He had pretty much won the elections, but before the results could be declared, he passed. Question now becomes, what happens? Who steps in? And assuming you even determine somebody who steps in, do they inherit, the votes already cast? As you recall, of course, the dispute went on, I believe, all the way to the Supreme Court. But at that time, INEC took a position, which position the Supreme Court was validated, and which position we have embedded, in this current amendment. The position we have taken now is that in such a situation, where the presumed winner passes before the declaration of the results, the party that fielded the deceased candidate will be given 21 days. No, first, INEC will countermand the election for 21 days. That's suspend the elections for 21 days, and then give the party 14 days within which to conduct fresh elections and then field a new candidate who will now step in the shoes of the deceased candidate and inherit those votes. And the INEC will proceed to declare the final results. So this was how we addressed the Kogi situation, because you recall that until that time, that lacuna was there, because neither the Constitution nor the Electoral Act envisaged such a situation. Yes, we've had instances like what transpired in the past in Adamawa, where Atiku at the time, having emerged as the governor of Adamawa, along with his deputy, Boni Haruna, they both had been declared winners, but they had not been sworn in before Atiku was elevated to become the vice presidential candidate. And you recall at that time, the dispute was whether or not there should be fresh elections or whether or not Boni Haruna could step into the shoes of Atiku. But of course, eventually the court resolved it. They haven't been declared winners. They ran on a single ticket. And therefore, Boni Haruna didn't need to do fresh elections, and he was sworn in. So that situation was addressed, unlike this Kogi situation that had never been envisaged by either the Electoral Act or the Constitution. So that's the first amendment we provided for in this latest exercise. Then leaving there, the next one, and indeed even a bigger one, is this issue of technology. Recall that in 2015, that was the first time that the smart card readers, were deployed. And of course, they were very, very, very effective. A lot of us are in the Senate today, because of the deployment of that smart card readers, by INEC. But after the elections, there were a plethora of litigations, from everywhere, as to whether or not INEC really had the power to rely on those smart card readers in determining the winners of those elections. Arguments were made for and against. For those who were against, the argument was that the only instrument, the only document recognized by the Electoral Act in Section 49 is actually the voters' register. That was the only document recognized by the Electoral Act for purposes of accreditation. And that anything outside of that right there was extra legal. So the question became whether or not reliance could be placed on the card readers. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided that even though the smart card readers were provided for in the electoral guidelines issued by INEC, to the extent that they were not embedded in the Electoral Act, they could not be relied upon to determine accreditation, and went further to invite the National Assembly to do something about that if we really felt that the smart card readers should become part of our laws. So we accepted that invitation, and we proceeded to embed it. So what we have done now is that we've now amended Section 49 to make the smart card readers, not just smart card readers, but the smart card readers and any other technological device that INEC will from time to time determine is in the best interest of electoral exercise to deploy for the elections. We've now embedded that to make it part of our laws. We've also proceeded to amend Section 138 of the Electoral Act. Until now, the argument then was that the INEC guidelines and regulations issued by INEC were mere, what was the word that was used? They were mere directives. And recall that the smart card readers, since they were not part of Section 49 of the Electoral Act, they were included in the INEC manuals and guidelines for the elections. And the argument was that since the guidelines wasn't part of Section 49 of the Electoral Act right there, they couldn't be relied upon. But we came to the position, looking at Section 153 of the Constitution, that INEC is a creation of the Constitution. And under Section 153 of the Constitution, INEC is empowered to make these rules, these guidelines and manuals, and they become subsidiary legislation. The courts have so pronounced. So what we have done right now, we've also elevated the manuals and the guidelines issued by INEC. We've now made them substantive law. So what we've done right now is that we've now amended Section 138. Under Section 138(1)(b), in the past, the law said you could bring one of the grounds under which you could bring an action to nullify an election is if you could show non-compliance. First, corrupt practices, and then non-compliance with the provisions of the Act. But in addition to non-compliance with the Act and corrupt practices, we've also added non-compliance with the provisions of the manuals and the guidelines issued by INEC under Section 153 of the Constitution. So if INEC in the next elections comes up with a guideline that says not only you're going to be using smart card readers or this or whatever new technological device that they so determined that should be used at that time, then that becomes, and you violate it, then that becomes a ground for you to bring a petition to challenge the election of the winner. So we did that. Moving from there, we also have the issues dealing with nominations of candidates. Before now, there's been so much impunity on the part of the political parties. There were situations where candidates were disqualified, some for maybe non-payment of party dues, development levies. In fact, they came up with so many excuses under which candidates who otherwise were qualified, were disqualified. And we said, no, we've now embedded in the Electoral Act that for you to disqualify a candidate now, you have to show that the candidate is not qualified pursuant to the provisions of the Constitution. And I'm sure those are sections 665, 106, and 131, I believe, dealing with qualifications. And then also there are also the disqualification provisions right there of the Constitution. So once you are able to show that you qualified pursuant to the provisions of the Constitution dealing with qualifications, and you are not otherwise in breach of those disqualification provisions of the Constitution, no political party during the nomination exercise can disqualify you. So we've provided that you cannot add to those provisions and you cannot subtract from those provisions.
Now, this is where we call it a day on this week's edition of The Gavel. If you have any views on any of the issues discussed, please email us on thegavel@channelstv.com. Thank you for staying with us and see you again next week.